All right. So last I don't know what to call these anymore. Lecture, I guess. Last lecture we talked about identifying our customers. Well, now we're going to talk about identifying our customer needs, right? Customer needs. This is, I'm not going to say it's the most important part of the whole design process, but it's definitely one of the more important. We'll settle for that. One of the more important steps in the design process. And the reason for this really is that we've talked about this before, right? Design is solving very complex problems, right? Very complex problems. And you just simply cannot solve a problem that you don't know, right? You're just firing blankly into the dark space around you. You need to figure out what your target is before you can start aiming at it, right? So our goal for this, right, is to very well define the problem we don't understand, or define the problem so that we can solve it later. This step defines the customer needs. Eventually we'll translate those into engineering functions, right? But not yet. This is just our customer needs. Again, as in every time I write one of these lectures, I think I say this over and again, but there are lots of ways of doing this. But in general, you want to be specific. So when you're describing your needs, the needs of your customer, well, let's do the best example, right? They might say, I want a good product, or I want a product that provides value for my money. What does that even mean, right? What do they value? Specifically, how can you provide that value to them? What is good? You have to nail these things down. Well, you don't have to. It's better for keeping your job. So, all right. So let's talk about some methods of doing this. All right. I don't know if this has a name. I call it empathy. Empathy, right? Basically, you're gonna think about it really hard. Put yourself. Can't spell basically. Basically, about it. You're gonna walk. What is that? There's lots of ways of saying this, right? Walk a mile in another guy's shoes. And this is hard, right? This is hard because you spent the last 4 years neglecting it. You're shoving it into this dark little corner, the basement of your heart. But now it's time to bring it out into the sun, right? You have to put yourself in these people's shoes, and you have to really imagine what the actual needs are, right? You have to imagine yourself going. If it's a product they're going to use with their hands, you have to imagine yourself going through those motions. Maybe even making a little mock-up or something so that you can figure out what their needs are. That's not enough, though. There's a limit to your imagination and probably a limit to your experience, too, right? We talked about in class, how do I put this? So for example, let's say you're designing a walker, right? Just a plain old walker, but you can walk fine. You probably don't experience the kind of hip pain and what range of motion creates that hip pain that requires a walker. So, empathy is a very good start. It helps you get certain things, especially certain things that people don't even mention, right? So, other things you could do like surveys, right? Surveys are great, but people tend to leave things off of surveys because they're so obvious. So, what's a good example? for example, you're selling TVs, right? And you make this glorious new TV that allows you to do hand motions, to do things like change the channel and stuff like this. You don't need a remote anymore, right? But what if people don't understand how to use the TV, right? They understand how to use a remote, and they expect a remote to be there as a backup. And they wouldn't say that in a survey, but you would try to imagine that through your empathy, right? Surveys are also useful. They're not great, but they're easily scalable, right? Later we'll talk about interviewing people, and if you only interview 3 people, and all 3 people like, I don't know, hot dogs, you might imagine that 100% of the people in the world like hot dogs. It's not the case, right? Well, I'm assuming not. Well, certainly not 100%. I don't like hot dogs. So, they're easily scalable, but with lots of caveats, right? They only tend to work well with topics people are very familiar with, right? So you can ask them about past experiences, but if you ask them about would they enjoy this, would they like this, would they do X, right? People tend to be very, very bad at this. I'll give you a good example, perhaps a little too germane, but there's a study where people asked college students how long it would take them to finish a major project, right? And they asked them, all right, what's 50% chance you'll be done in 2 weeks, or give us a time period that you think there's a 50% chance that you'll be done by that. So we'll call that the 50% level. So you might say there's a 50% chance that I'll be done with this project in 2 weeks, right? Then they said a 75% confidence level, right? So like, at what time period are you 75% confident you'll finish this? Which might be like 3 weeks, right? And then they said 99%, which is basically certain, right? And then they actually had these guys do this project, and it turns out only 13% of people were capable, or not capable, 13% of people actually finished the project by the time that they said there was a 50% chance that they would finish it. 19% finished it within the time that they said that there was a 3/4 chance that they'd finish it. 3/4 chance. Only 19% finished it. And by the time that they said that there was nearly 100% chance that they'd be done with this project, they were almost completely certain they would be done with this project in this time. Only 50% of people finished their project. Which means half the people went over the time that they pretty much guaranteed they would finish it by. And the other example I like to give of this, fun, is when I first was about to go into college, they gave us these surveys to help us, where they picked roommates for us, right? And in this survey, I'd never had a clean room, but I decided I was going to be, what did I say? Oh, to bed before midnight and with a neat and tidy room, right? Turns out that was a complete and utter lie. I thought I would have a neat and tidy room when it was the only space I had, right? Turns out no. I just don't clean up after myself. My roommate had a similar experience. He put neat and tidy room to bed before midnight, but he had always gone to bed after midnight. He just thought during college he would start going to bed earlier. Turns out he didn't do that either. We both screwed up. It was a wash. So a little bit better than surveys are interviews, right? Interviews. And the reason interviews are better, the reason interviews are better, you can ask follow-up questions, right? So you ask somebody a common question, maybe the same question you would ask in a survey, but then you follow up on the questions and you basically get more detailed answers. Plus, with a survey, you're limited in the number of questions, right? You can't add questions in the middle of a survey, but you can follow up on questions. You can, you might learn about surprising things, right? Learn about surprising things and follow up on them. Now, this is still, you generally need to be trained to do this well. It's difficult, right? which is why people get paid to do it, but it's good, right? It takes considerable skill to remove your bias, too, from these questions. You want to ask leading questions. Slightly better, in addition to interviews, you can also do focus groups. It gives you a little bit better statistical basis than just a single interview. Basically, you're doing like 15 interviews at the same time, 10 interviews at the same time. But again, you have to be careful with this too. They're subject to groupthink, right? So this is where somebody asks a question of a group. The first person who pipes up says, "Oh, I like hot dogs," and now everybody else is afraid to speak up. Or they assume that the entire group likes hot dogs even though they don't. And as a result, it seems like there's a consensus, but there's really not. Groupthink. It's very difficult. All kinds of other reasons why focus groups are difficult to do, and typically you have to be fairly well trained, fairly skilled moderators, I guess is what you could call it. Apparently I'm talking about hot dogs today, so that's going to be awesome. Another option is something called hold on. I actually have to spell that one. Ethnography, right? Ethnography is basically you study people in, I don't know how to say this, but you watch people you study people in their natural environment. This is becoming a very big deal now with computers, because now we can record hours and hours of video, and very easily with webcams. You can also track people's behavior online. So this is actually becoming a big thing. Black & Decker, for example, well known for their appliance line. Black & Decker, actually it's not an and, right? It's a little ampersand symbol, whatever, I can't even do it. Black & Decker, they have a whole, when you first get hired by them, they have this whole 6-month, it's a 2-year training program, and 6 months of it is spent with their ethnography group. So you get trained in ethnography, and you actually watch people use a drill in real life, right? You tell them, hey, go drill 8 holes. You watch them do it. So that's pretty cool. And there's also, never neglect this, internal data, right? Internal data. You can get tons of information from warranty requests, right? What do people mostly use their warranty for? Is it because it actually breaks, because they're unhappy with it, whatever? Customer complaints. Just talking to customer service and asking them what most people complain about can be terribly useful. And many, many more. Any way you can possibly get data on your customer is awesome. Eventually, you're going to need to rank these needs, right? It's not enough just to have a list of things. You need to know what is more important than what. Yes, not all needs are equal, right? Not all needs are equal. Let's go back to the happy toy example we used last lecture. You might do an interview. You might do an interview, and the parents say, in an interview, we don't want no choking, right? No choking parts. So nothing small enough that a child can swallow it and choke on it. I don't know how to spell that. Parent. And then you go and you interview the kids, and the kids say, "Oh man, we want to fire small little darts at each other." This kid wants to fire small little darts at his annoying younger brother. Which, to be fair, as you're doing this, that's not what you would actually write down, right? You would write fire projectiles to simulate combat. But regardless, which one of these are you going to rank higher, right? Number 1 or number 2? Well, clearly, this one outranks the kids. So you're going to design so that the child does not choke before you give them a cool little toy that they can fire things at their brother, right? This is very difficult, right? It requires a lot of subtlety, taking surveys and talking to people, having them. Once you develop a set of needs, right? You can create a list of needs, and then go back with a survey and order that list, right? So you can ask people, do they prefer, do they prefer Batman toys in their Happy Meal, or do they prefer Superman? Well, that's a bad example, but you get the idea, right? You can have them rank these needs that you've already developed, or you can try to rank them yourself. But you need to rank the needs, or you need to weight them, right? So that basically means, if you have 3 or 4 of these things, you would assign a number between 1 and 10, where the number tells you how important it is, right? You could have a bunch of 8s, but you need to be able to weight the needs to tell which is more important than which eventually. Something that can help with that is classifying the needs. Right? So some of these needs you'll find are what we call expectors. These are basic. These are what people expect to see in a product. These are basic features. That are everyone expects. Fortunately, these are easy to find. Usually, you can benchmark, which we'll talk about next lecture. But you can benchmark to find these, and the bad part about these, right, is if you meet these needs, if you meet the need, what happens? No one cares, because you were supposed to meet the need. So congratulations, it's like you did exactly what people expected of you. So they're not happy, they're not sad, there's just no emotion, right? If you don't meet it, people are very unhappy, right? Example of this might actually be cup holders in cars, right? It's technically not very safe to be drinking while you're driving. I mean, not drinking, but drinking while you're driving. But if you don't have a cup holder in a car nowadays, people will test drive it and go, this isn't even a car. I'm not buying this. So, expectors, right? These are basic things people expect. Then there are things that people explicitly say they want, right? Spokens, right? So you interview them, you ask them on surveys, you use focus groups. These are, like I said, specific, explicit, meaning they actually said this out loud. Features asked for by a customer, right? Now, if we meet these, and the better we meet them, right? Meet this need. What happens? They're happy, which is great. It means we want to meet these needs. If they're not met, unhappy, right? In addition to spokens, there are unspoken needs. Again, with these are very similar to spoken needs. They're implicit, right? People don't necessarily understand that they want these things. But if you meet them, they're happy. If they're not met, generally they're unhappy. They might not know why, right? These are very difficult. Unspoken needs are very difficult to discover, right? One of the reasons the original iPod was so successful was that its user interface was much better than any other user interface on the market, right? People might not have understood that they were so frustrated with it, but once they got an iPod in their hands, they were able to just scroll around. It made it moving through giant lists of songs much easier, right? Unspoken need, and then finally there are things we call exciters. These are things that are new, right? New capabilities. New capabilities and features. Oops. New capabilities and features. If you succeed, if you meet these needs, people are really happy, right? If you don't meet them, they don't care. Why? Because they never expected these features in the first place. So, yeah. So, for example, if you have a need and you decide that that need is an expector, it's just plain expected for your product, you better meet it, right? Otherwise, people will be very unhappy. Spokens and unspokens, right? You have a little bit more leeway. If you meet them, people are happy. If they're not met, they're unhappy, and you have to kind of decide the level of influence that you have, right, on their happiness. And then exciters may be on the bottom of the list. If you can do it, great, right? If you can do it, great. People are happy. If you can't, well, oh well. We'll try it for the next time, right? So these can help you organize and figure out the different weights for your products. So let's quick do a few examples of needs we might find. Let's again talk about McDonald's what are they called? Not Happy Toys. Happy Meals, right? Happy Meal toys. I swear, at some point I'll get better at writing and talking at the same time. Let's say we do a survey, right? And we find out that 70% of parents want gender-specific toys, right? They want, I don't know, what's a gender-specific toy? You get the idea, right? Gender-specific toys. Dump truck for their son and a doll for their daughter, right? And you find that 30% of parents want toys that make noise. Okay? 30% want toys that make noise. So, in fact, you might also find that 50% want toys that don't make noise. You know, this might actually be lower than that. 10%. 10% want toys that make noise. 50% want toys that don't make noise, right? If you want to find out some more information, so you interview some people, and you find out that a parent's primary concern is that their children do not choke. Do not choke on your toy. They also, secondarily, of course, want their kids to like it. That doesn't tell you much information, but basically, so now, to figure out what these kids like, right, we're going to have to get a little creative here. What does like mean? Well, let's interview some kids and see what they say. So let's interview some kids. These are the parents, right? The kids, when you talk to them, basically say their primary concern is they want that cool thing they saw on TV the other day. back in the day when there's Transformers, this was Transformers. I haven't kept up on modern TV options for, I don't know, what's the age group, 1 to 6 TV options, whatever. Cool thing on TV / movie that they saw, right? That's not really a whole lot of information for you, so then you're going to do some ethnographic studies, right? What do these kids really like? You know that this will grab their attention, but if every time a parent buys a Happy Meal toy for a kid and the kid just leaves it in the car before they go inside, they're probably not going to keep buying Happy Meal toys. So if we do an ethnographic study, which means we pay parents to bring their kids and put them in a room with glass walls and we watch them play with toys, we find out some interesting stuff. We find out that when we're watching kids playing, and we're not doing it creepy like, we find that they spend a lot more time. You'd quantify this, but you spend a lot more time with toys that do stuff. Right? So, a ballerina that actually spins around on a base, or a dump truck that has a little dump thing that tilts up. Even just arms that move. They spend a lot more time with toys that do stuff. So now you know that if you make your toy articulate in some way, they'll spend a lot more time on it, right? You also find out by watching them that they chew on everything. Chew on everything. So, what does that tell you? Well, you learn that one of the needs is to make it so they can't bite pieces of it off. Right? Can't bite pieces off. So that's a rough overview of how you do this, and then next you'd have to rank these things, right? So providing gender-specific toys just means you have to make 2 separate toy lines, right? That's much more important to you than making toys that make noise, right? Which is much less important than toys that don't make noise. You would probably, since people said this right out loud, that they want to make it clear that their children can't choke on their toys, right? So that might be at the very top of your list. No choking stuff, right? Because we also know that there might be a massive recall, which would be lots of bad publicity, whatever. Also, kids would choke, too bad. And you might then, maybe you have do not choke at the top, do not choke at the top, gender-specific toys next. This isn't scientific, obviously. Toys that make noise / cool thing in a movie. You find out that a cool thing in a movie makes the astute kids, when they're in line, go, oh, I want a Happy Meal. So cool thing in a movie. Cool thing in a movie. And next you have to choose between toys that make noise or not making noise. That's a pretty easy thing. That's pretty important. 50% of parents would not buy a toy that makes noise. So no noise. Then you want to probably have articulating. And somewhere in here we have no biting. So you just want a rough order of these things here. And as a McDonald's, your primary concern is probably safety, right? The last thing you want is bad publicity for something that you're essentially trying to give away. Great. All right. So the next lecture is going to be about benchmarking.